Brad Hoylman-Sigal is the new Manhattan Borough President, and it's been so busy and so active from day one. But I need to ask you this. So how did we do in removing the snow?
Well, I think we did good, particularly in the first 24 to 48 hours. 90% of Manhattan was cleared at least once in the first 12 hours. Now we still have some snow at the corners of sidewalks. We got to get rid of that snow because older folks, people with disabilities are having trouble with access. So we're hearing some reports there, but I know that sanitation is doing the best job. And I actually got a chance to go out and thank them yesterday. You know, a lot of people show up the day of the snowstorm. I was advised to show up a couple of days after and thank them for all the work, because they worked 12-hour shift, 24 hours a day, and I think they did an excellent job. So I commend the mayor and his team and all of the emergency responders during that time.
So I have to ask you this, though. You know, one of the things that happened during the snow was that there were 10 people, homeless people, many of them, who died, and many of them, some of them were in Manhattan. And I wonder how you feel about the outreach efforts that we're making to help people who are unhoused find shelter.
Well, this is one of the mayor's top priorities. It's what he ran on, housing homeless New Yorkers and having a response to this crisis of humanity that's on our streets. So my heart breaks, and you know, the hope count itself, where we all go out and count the number of people who are unhoused, was actually delayed because of the cold. And that's telling in and of itself. It's too cold to even count the unhoused people. Think of the people who are unhoused themselves. We have to do more. We have to build more housing, supportive housing. We have to get people off the streets. No other world city has the problem we have, and we have to fix it.
So do you think the answer is building more supportive housing, building more affordable housing, or are there people that just need to be hospitalized, that need psychiatric help and need a different kind of support?
I think it's both. Everything has to be on the table. Certainly housing has to be top of our priority, and government needs to do direct investment. We can't just rely on the private sector to build supportive housing, which is a real need in Manhattan at the moment.
So I have to ask you, because we all know that you were a state senator for a very long time in Albany and know Albany better than anybody I know. So the mayor of the city of New York says he wants Albany to tax the rich and tax corporations. I wonder if you think this is something that's doable in Albany this year, given the fact that everybody in Albany is running for re-election, including the governor of the state of New York. It's not, raising taxes in an election year seems to be a third rail. I wonder how you feel about it and whether the mayor is going to be able to convince enough people to get it passed.
Well, I think the mayor has a really strong point. The top 1% of earners in the city of New York pay the same effective tax rate as the bottom 40%. And remember that the top 1%, they earn $7 to $9 million a year. So that is a disparity that the mayor is pointing out. But certainly that is going to be a challenge, especially when the governor has drawn a line in the sand. She's saying no new taxes on personal income. But corporate taxes, she's open to. And I think that is an area where the mayor and the governor will have agreement.
See, I need to ask you about that, because if you take a look at the corporate tax rate, given the combination of city and state corporate taxes and the taxes that corporations pay for the MTA,
yes,
we pay the same as New Jersey. Corporations pay the same as New Jersey, which is like 17.5% or something like that. If you add the taxes, it could double the tax rate. And that could mean corporations, many of whom are in your borough,
indeed,
they could leave. And I wonder if that's something that troubles you, because it's part of the economic base of Manhattan.
Well, one has to be mindful of that, and it's always a balancing act. But you also have to remember that corporations themselves, they are made up of people. They know that they thrive because of city services, fire, police. They are being kept safe, as are their employees, parks, schools, mass transit. You have to pay for those goods. And that's why corporations want to headquarter here in Manhattan and across the city, is because of those great city services and assets.
If the corporate tax rates double?
Well, obviously, it's a balancing act. It always is. But in terms of the very wealthy, the statistics show that they have not fled New York City or the metro area in recent years, as some would have claimed.
The reason I ask these questions about it is because the governor said that she doesn't believe there's a need to raise taxes this year because the state is expecting an extra, believe it or not, $17 billion from Wall Street bonuses, and that the city would get that as well. So I wonder how you feel about that, but also the New York Stock Exchange has opened a branch in Texas. And so there's a worry on the part of some people in the business community that they would take some of their business and their corporations and their $17 billion worth of bonuses and move it to Texas, which is a much lower tax state. Is that a concern for the Manhattan Borough President?
It is. It should always be a concern for any elected official. We are competing on a world stage, on a national stage. We want to headquarter businesses here. We want to keep them here. Certainly balancing taxes with the services that are provided is one of the most artful forms of government. And that's what the governor and the mayor are going to be engaged in during this budget process, a conversation that hopefully leads to the greater equity for all New Yorkers and corporations, but also providing the funds necessary to keep the city running and providing for the most vulnerable.
I know you've only been Manhattan Borough President for a few weeks, but I wonder if you think, the mayor has talked about finding efficiencies rather than closing the budget. Are there enough efficiencies that you can find in the budget that you won't have to do some wholesale cuts?
I hope so. He's made certain that each department has an efficiency expert to look for potential savings. It sounds like a good first step. You want to look for savings first before you go to cuts or tax increases. So it's a logical first step in my mind.
So also he talked about the fact that you could find an efficiency by limiting the SRG unit at the police department, which handles protests and terrorism. Good idea, bad idea?
Well, I'd want to see what the outlines of that are. Certainly, with everything happening in this country, with ICE, at our doorsteps, we have to be very careful in terms of, cuts to our own police force, because we don't want ICE coming into New York City as they have in other municipalities. And of course, the tragic murders that we've seen in Minneapolis are front of mind, as they are for I would say, most New Yorkers.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but we will be right back. We are back with Manhattan Borough President Brad Hoylman-Sigal. So another issue that's getting a lot of attention is antisemitism, the rise of antisemitism. And in Manhattan, there was a major instance where congregants at the Park East Synagogue had to deal with protesters who were hurling epithets at them. What do you think the city should be doing to try to convince people that this is just hate crime has to stop?
Well, hate crimes and anti-Semitism have skyrocketed. The statistic is in 2025, there was a hate crime, an anti-Semitic hate crime every 26 hours.
What?
Every 26 hours.
Wow.
And that is a shocking statistic, and we have to do more. I support a buffer zone around places of worship, including synagogues. NYPD, I've spoken to the police commissioner, already has the power to create a frozen zone, and they have admitted that they should have done that at the Park East Synagogue, but didn't do it in time. But, it starts with education. No one is born with hate in their heart or as an anti-Semite. We need to do more in our educational curriculum to teach tolerance and acceptance for all ethnicities and religious groups.
See, when I take a look at the situation that's going on, you see a lot of hate crimes. It's not just against Jewish people, although that's 57% of the hate crimes, but there's hate crimes against Asians. It's against people who are minorities. It's so rampant in our society. And I wonder what has changed in our society that we normalize hate.
I think it's two things. One is, I don't think we do a good enough job with civic education. Basic understanding of our government and the need for tolerance and democratic principles. We don't do it. It's not clear. It's not a clear curriculum in New York State. I'll say that. Secondly, of course, the rise of social media, correlates with the rise
Yeah.
of anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ hate, racism. I have passed a couple of bills in Albany. One, we are holding accountable X and Facebook and other platforms where they have to now report incidents of hate to the New York State Attorney General and disclose how they're dealing with those instances. Those were formerly private to those corporations. Elon Musk, expectedly, is suing us. Tish James is defending that lawsuit. And we've also increased the number of charges. I worked with Alvin Bragg and Assemblywoman Grace Lee. There's an additional 23 new charges for hate crimes. So we have to be more aggressive on policing. We have to be more aggressive on social media. But it really starts in our schools. And that's where I think that's been our biggest vulnerability over the last couple of decades.
Do you think the social media companies should take responsibility and not allow people to put hate speech of any kind on their platforms?
Well, there's been a shift since Donald Trump was elected for the second time. Social media companies are taking a much greater hands-off approach. I don't know about you, Marcia, but when I've reported an anti-Semitic incident directed at me or an anti-LGBTQ incident directed at me or my family, when I report it to X, I will get an email back saying, we have investigated and the case is closed. There's no follow-up or accountability. That needs to change.
So is this up to the legislature now to come up with some rule, some law that would penalize, like with big financial penalties so that they would do it, some kind of law that prevents hate speech against anyone?
Well, we do have pretty strong laws in that regard. And of course, there are First Amendment concerns around even protests outside of religious institutions. So much like taxes, it's a balancing act, but it's an important one because no one should be subject to hate. And the First Amendment doesn't protect people from being targeted for hate speech or incidents.
So let's change topics. How do you want to put your stamp on this office?
Well, I really believe this office is about building more housing, addressing the crisis of homelessness on the streets and affordability that the mayor has so eloquently talked about. So that's number one. And we have to look at some of the archaic laws and regulations that have prevented new building, including the law that was developed in the 1870s when tenements were rampant.
1870?
1870. Which does not allow a bedroom to have a non-openable window. So that is a tenement era regulation that needs to be changed with our modern HVAC systems. You shouldn't restrict the conversion of commercial buildings to residential by these archaic building codes.
So is there anything on the horizon that you could see that would make it easier to take some of these and renovate some of these older buildings so that they could be put back into the housing stock?
Well, that's one, like changing that code, and there are many others, including greater tax incentives, cutting the red tape around the transfer from commercial to residential. Look, in East Midtown, it is a goldmine of potential new housing stock for the city. So I'm excited to dig into that new zoning proposal and help build more housing for people who need it most.
So since you're talking about housing, there was a study that came out, you may not be aware of it, but there was a study came out on Friday from NYU, and it was a proposal that instead of taking the $1 billion or so that would be coming from making buses free, that it be put into extending the subways to transit deserts so that there would be more interest in building housing around subway stations. And the estimate in the report said that if you did that, it would bring 167,000 more units of housing just around, in areas that are now transit deserts. I wonder how you feel about that and if that is something that the city should explore.
Absolutely. I read that report on the way here. That's so funny that you mentioned it.
I mean, I read it and I was like, really?
Yeah. Well, certainly transit-oriented development is the future for the city. And look, around Penn Station, we have vacant lots that were going to be committed to commercial development. but now I think should be committed toward residential development.
Good idea.
Those are apartments that are near the busiest train hub in the Western Hemisphere and every train line that goes through Manhattan. I hope the governor looks at that and thinks about, we should build Mitchell-Lama Point, 2.0 in this neighborhood. I mean, we could really dig in and create a new neighborhood around Penn Station. That's a very exciting prospect.
So is that something that and when you talk about you want to devote your office to finding new ways to build housing, is that one thing that you want to look at?
Indeed. I'm part of a task force that Andy Byford has assembled to redevelop Penn Station, and housing in the neighborhood also needs to be part of the topic. I'm also going to be focused on arts and culture, because I think it's the one area that we can have the greatest impact in my office toward committing capital dollars and urging private philanthropy, corporations, and individuals to match our efforts to provide support for struggling arts institutions across the borough.
So one last question I wanted to ask you is this. It seems like the city is into what we would call mallification. There's a lot of big box stores. There's a lot of chain stores that come in, especially in Manhattan. And I wonder, is there anything that your office can do to try to preserve the, artsy, funky, small restaurants and businesses that have always been so much a flavor of Manhattan and the various, neighborhoods?
Absolutely. The thing that I've zeroed in on, which really I think addresses the plight of empty storefronts, is an unfair tax called the commercial rent tax.
What is that?
The commercial rent tax is a double tax that businesses pay on their base rent, but only in a certain part of Manhattan. Nowhere else in the city, nowhere else in the 5 boroughs, but only between 96th Street and Reed do they pay an additional 8% tax
Really?
on their base rent. That's 25 grand or more for retail and restaurants at the ground level. So I'm going to Albany with a proposal that that's being carried by Senator Liz Krueger and Assemblymember Alex Boras to try to get that tax nullified and give relief to those small businesses that are struggling so mightily, especially during this economy.
Well, you're saying that also contributes to the empty storefronts that we see
Indeed.
all around the city. I mean, we see them on Broadway, we see them in the Village. Do you think that you have a chance of convincing lawmakers in a tough economic time to get rid of that tax?
I do. We're actually conducting a study right now that I hope shows that getting rid of this tax will pay for itself and then some.
Okay, on that note, I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank you at home for joining us as well.